So, around 8 months ago, a prominent YouTuber reached out to me with a question about Dutch design. As an American who works in the Netherlands as a transportation engineer, I tend to get questions like these fairly often from the urbanist community. But he wanted to know what the capacity of city roads were according to the Dutch road design manuals. And my answer was unexpected for him and caused a bit of a rabbit hole because I had to tell him, yeah, sorry, that number you're looking for, it doesn't actually really exist. So, if we want to understand why that number doesn't exist, we first need to understand how Dutch design is organized. There are two main manuals they use for roads here, which might seem kind of weird, but here's why. The type of traffic flow in a rural area is going to be fundamentally different than what you'll end up seeing in a city. In the country, traffic flow is usually smooth. If you're an engineer, you could even compare it to laminar flow, which is when water flows smoothly in a pipe. There's not a lot of obstacles slowing you down, and the few that do are usually spaced out far enough that it doesn't cause a serious interruption to traffic. So, the number of cars that can fit through the system is going to be limited by the capacity of the lane that it's in, which, for your reference, is around 1,800 vehicles per hour. But when you get into the city, the traffic flow isn't smooth anymore. Instead, it becomes stop and go. There's all kinds of things getting in the way, like pedestrian crossings, parked cars, and most importantly, signalized intersections. From an efficiency point of view, stop and go traffic is really bad because for a significant amount of time, no vehicles are moving. So that 1,800 vehicles per hour number becomes irrelevant because only a fraction of that number is ever going to be able to get through the intersection. So instead of lane capacity being the bottleneck for hourly flow, it becomes how many vehicles can get through the intersection per hour, or intersection capacity. If this is all sounding a little too theoretical for you, fear not. This is a Build the Lanes video, so of course I had to do my own traffic study to give you a real world example of what I'm talking about. I grew up near the town of Roseville, California, and one of the busiest stroads in Roseville is called Douglas Boulevard, and it has some pretty big intersections. Some of them have 6 incoming lanes and 3 departing lanes, 9 lanes in total. Now, you'd probably assume that there is some pretty major traffic flow going through these intersections, right? But guess what? My team and I studied the 4 biggest intersections in this whole corridor: East Roseville Parkway, Sierra College, Rocky Ridge, and Auburn Folsom. And we found that during rush hour, in 3 of those big intersections, all of the traffic accumulating in the eastbound or westbound directions varied between 549 vehicles per hour to 1,500 vehicles per hour. Which might sound like a lot, but that's not even enough traffic to fully saturate a single driving lane. However, the biggest intersection of the 4, Douglas and East Roseville Parkway, did accumulate enough traffic, 1,850 vehicles per hour. But you know what else? Douglas and East Roseville Parkway is 9 lanes wide on each side of the intersection. It took a right turn lane, 3 through lanes, and 2 left turn lanes, 6 lanes in total, to accumulate traffic above 1,800 vehicles per hour. I hope this helps make it clear just how much of a bottleneck the intersections are in cities to free flow traffic. But just don't take some random guy's word on YouTube for it. If you're like me and you have nothing better to do during a weekday, go to an intersection and count how much traffic accumulates in one direction during an hour. I would bet you that almost every time, the number you get will be under 1,800 vehicles per hour. But build the lane, some of you may ask. If intersections almost always prevent traffic from exceeding the capacity of a single lane, then what's the point of building city roads that are wider than one lane in each direction? To which I would say, well, aren't you clever? They must have forgotten to mention it in the single class that a traffic engineer has to take about traffic before actually getting to call themselves a traffic engineer. But putting my snarkiness aside for a second, there are some legitimate cases when multiple lanes are warranted. For example, the road should be widened at the approach to the intersection itself. This provides space for waiting traffic to queue and offers at least one lane for each type of movement, which is good for efficiency. Or if two intersections are close to one another, it does make sense to connect them with two through lanes. Like this example in Harlem. It wouldn't really make sense to neck down to a single lane only to pop back to a second one just 100 meters later. And in cities, we obviously can't forget about transit. So if you want your dedicated bus lane or tram line, the road needs to be wider. But beyond these cases, there's nothing that can really justify urban roads wider than two lanes, and definitely not monstrosities like this. All these extra lanes really are is just useless asphalt, accomplishing nothing except making roads more expensive to build and more dangerous to drive on. They're not adding any real traffic capacity to the stop and go system. And that's why in the Netherlands, whenever a road in the city is rebuilt, unless it includes one of the three cases I mentioned earlier, the road is always narrowed to a single lane in each direction. Because if there's one thing that the Dutch hate, it's having to pay for something that provides no benefit. I get asked by US urbanists a lot, how can we fix traffic in the US? Or how can we realistically become more like the Netherlands? And this is the direction I always point them to. You could change nothing else about the US road system or its land use and still be able to do this. Which is nice because then you can sidestep the rabbit hole of how do we even begin argument that flummoxes so many advocates. And most importantly, there's something for everyone here to like, and there's really not that much to complain about. Regardless of if someone has been orange-pilled or not, money always talks. And explaining to people that their city is wasting millions of dollars building lanes that are impossible to benefit from is going to make more people listen, especially when it's argued that the savings can mean better road maintenance or lower taxes.
It's so beautiful.
Two-lane roads are also significantly safer since all the conflict points from weaving, merging, and overtaking are removed. And speeding is also reduced since any car going too fast will eventually get stuck behind someone going the speed limit, although the widened area at the intersection gives a chance for passing. It also does wonders for every other transportation mode, since all that extra space can mean wider sidewalks, separated bike paths, transit lanes, or just more greenery to cut down on heat and noise pollution. Just look at Rotterdam as a perfect example of this. And if all of that still doesn't convince you, it would also mean improved traffic flow. Just think about how many traffic signals only exist because it's not safe to turn left across multiple lanes at the same time. Narrower roads mean fewer signals. Fewer signals means less stop and go, and that means better traffic flow. So if it's so obvious, you may be wondering, why hasn't this been done already? Well, it takes a certain leap in logic, an evolution in how we think about road systems. Designers have to go from thinking that road engineering is just copying and pasting road templates onto corridors to realizing that they're working with a comprehensive system where they can't just model things in isolation. And this is also something that applies to advocates. The "build it and they will come" line is often used to make the case for building more bike lanes, but it actually falls into the same faulty logic that classical traffic engineers use. I think this problem is best represented by the NACDO Transit Street Design Guide that probably every urbanist has seen at least once in their lifetime. It's really not that helpful if you want to make streets better.
Eh? What do you mean, eh? Eh.
Take the two-way protected bikeway, for example, with the advertised 7,500 people per hour claim. I live in the Netherlands, and I can tell you that is a bold claim. I am going to guess they got this number by calculating theoretically how many cyclists could fit on a 10-foot wide bike path, which would be amazing if it weren't for the inconvenient fact of that's not how it works. How much cycling that cycling infrastructure ends up causing is actually based on things like safety, attractiveness, directness, coherence, and comfort. And that's why the Say Aerove guide for bicycle infrastructure recommends widening the cycling path as cycling intensities increase, so the path remains safe and comfortable as the use increases, not because they expect cycling volumes to magically double if they double the width of the bike path. And yes, that number at the bottom does say 750 vehicles per hour. You're off by a factor of 10 for Christ's sake, Snackdo. Or like the guide's claim about sidewalk capacity, is that even how sidewalks work? Is it about justifying their existence based on throughput, or is it more about improving the residential quality of an area and providing access to everything next to it? I could spend the next hour talking about problems with this document, but I think that most of you get the point. We need designers to think differently about how car roads in cities actually work, but we also need them to think differently about the other transportation modes too. Talking about geometric capacity is fine if you want another bicycle gutter, but it's not fine if you want to create a quality cycling route that most people will actually use. So, that's my video about how roads work in cities. Roads have a theoretical geometric capacity, and if you're near a city, it doesn't matter.